So you see how things have changed, right? In the old days, people used to travel from China to India to hear the teachings. The only guide along the way was the dead bodies and skeletons of the people who went before them, who didn't make it, and still their desire for the Dharma was so strong they persisted.
It's like the road to Molong.
Like the road to Molong.
Scattered with corpses.
Human corpses?
Kangaroo.
Kangaroos, wombats. Yes, no, we didn't kill anyone along the way, did we? No, just as well. And if we did, we don't need to. And just for the sake of the recording, I'd like to advise my lawyers that I know nothing. So, okay, so how are your monkeys? How are they going? We're starting to settle down, right? Yeah. Eventually they'll tire, surely. Surely. There's one more monkey I'd like to mention. Do you remember the other monkeys we've met so far? There's the monkey swinging through the forest. And there's the sad story of the other monkey, the tar trap monkey, who didn't make it. Another corpse. And this monkey has some friends. So the Buddha tells a simile of, I guess, this body and mind that we've got bound up in. And he says, imagine that there were 6 animals, all different species, all who love their own territories, and someone has come along and bound them all together with a strong rope. So we have a snake, an alligator, a bird, a dog, a jackal, and a monkey. Who was listening? Very good. 6, almost 6. Well done, good enough, I'll take it. So, of course, the snake wants to go to its territory, which is under the anthill. Snakes like to go to anthills. The alligator wants to go to its territory in the water. The bird wants to go to the sky. The dog wants to go to the village, get some food. The jackal wants to go to the cremation ground to nibble some of those dead corpses Patricia's been lying around. And the monkey wants to go to the forest and have a swing. So these animals are all bound together, right? With one big rope around their waists. And the Buddha says that these animals will struggle and struggle and struggle, all trying to get to their various domains, their various territories. But eventually, some of them will tire and settle down, and the strongest will win, drag the others along. So the Buddha used this as an analogy for our senses. Do you remember hearing Bhante Sujaro and Bhante Brahmali talking about this sutta at the retreat we did for the... No? Okay. Sorry, I shouldn't have asked. Delete that scene. And so these actually stand in for the senses, the 6 sense organs that we have. So the snake eyes. Yeah? The ears, for some reason we're not sure, the alligator. We're not sure because alligators don't really have ears. So the nose is like a beak for the bird. The dog, always hungry, like a Labrador. The tongue, taste. The jackal, looking for bodies, is the faculty of touch. And the monkey, of course, is the mind. Yeah, so 6 sense faculties in Buddhism. So the 5 senses plus the mind. And so these are all bound up together, right, by this body that we inhabit. And when you sit in meditation, you'll see them struggling with each other, right? Oh, it's time for lunch. Maybe I just get up and go early. Oh, that sound of that bird is so sweet. Why don't I just listen to that for a little while? Or what was that out of the corner of my eye? Why don't I open my eyes and watch? So you see, in this way, our senses are usually kind of at battle with one another, and one of them usually will win outright. Sometimes it will be, for us, quite predictable over and over again. I'm like a visual person. I love to look at things. Some people love to listen. They want to go and listen to music instead of meditating. So that's one way we can understand this. Another way I'm suggesting, this isn't how the Buddha used it, is our hindrances are kind of similar, right? Like we tend to have these patterns of behavior, patterns of thinking or tendencies. One of our hindrances is usually the strongest. For some of you, it will be sloth and torpor. And out of all the hindrances you experience during your meditation practice, maybe it will be sloth and torpor that goes for the win, right? Over and over again, that hindrance will be the one that you experience the most. For some of you, it might be restlessness. You feel always, as soon as you sit down, it's like, time to go. I'm over it. And you sit for a bit and you're like, actually, I'll sit. No, actually, I really will go. This time I'm going to go. And you just go. And that one will be the one that is the hindrance that will win. Some of you might be ill will, right? You're sitting there and you just hate everything and everyone that comes up into your meditation practice over and over again, and that becomes the inclination of your mind. So just thinking a little bit about our own meditation animal. Like, what is your meditation animal? You know, if you could make an animal out of your mind, what might it be? Is it like one of those swallows that flits about from thing to thing out there? Is it like the rainbow bee eater diving into its hole and hiding? What would your meditation animal be? Anyway, just drop that idea and maybe we'll pick it up again in a little while. But certainly understand your mind. What is the tendency that you see is most prevalent in your mind? Often this is the thing that we need to work on, because the stuff that we bring into our meditation comes from somewhere in our life, and we usually take that back out into the world, right? Something like ill will. We're just so irritated and annoyed by everything, by people, by our work, by governments, whatever. And then we sit in meditation, and that's what we see bubbling up inside of ourselves, right? The echoes of this tendency that our mind is leaning towards all the time. And then when we leave our meditation, if we've been spending all our time with that, we take that with us. Think about those grumpy old men. They didn't start out grumpy old men. Drop by drop, that wasn't directed at anyone, Joe. I heard you coughing. I never think of you as grumpy. And drop by drop by drop, their mind has inclined towards this grumpiness, this anger. And the Buddha says, in that sutta that I mentioned earlier on the retreat, the 2 types of thought, whatever the inclination of our mind. So whatever thoughts we have, that becomes the inclination of our mind. It's like almost like we dye our mind with these thoughts. Which is why it's so profound to allow for those hindrances to be let go of, so that we don't have these defilements in our mind. We're no longer feeding them, we're not nourishing them. They lose strength, they become weak, and they can disappear completely from our mind. And in the same way, we're so lucky to glimpse things like joy and rapture and bliss. Meditation is known as bhavana, development. When we sit in meditation, we have the opportunity to develop these good minds. When we have minds of joy and rapture and bliss, we develop those in our mind. Those become the inclination of our mind. We become happy. We become happy in our meditation, far from suffering. We take that happiness into our life. And we're joyful, happy people. And this is the path. This is why we are doing this. We want to become the very best kind of person we can be. We want to become the best version of ourselves. And to do that, we do need to do some work. We do need to let go of some stuff. We do need to cultivate some things that allow us to become the very best person we can be. And allow us to let go of all that horrible suffering and to feel happy, free, to be really far from that suffering. And I've seen this in my own practice, how my mind has changed over the time that I've been practicing meditation. Speaking to many of you during our chats, you've mentioned, yeah, I can see actually that I've changed since I began my practice. Some of you feel like you've plateaued a little bit, that you kind of have stopped making these great transformations. But sometimes these changes can be very, very subtle. And I'm sure that you have made tremendous progress in your spiritual path. And when you look back at the person you were before you began, you may see, I am actually quite different. I'm not so quick to anger. I'm more kind, I'm more generous. I have a tendency towards love and compassion and kindness now. And even if it's difficult for you to see, people around you would have seen it. And even if you don't think much of your progress, and I think you should, because it's pretty amazing actually, what you've done with your mind, think about how fortunate you are compared to all those other people in the world, billions and billions and billions of people who never even think about working on their minds, who never think to make some effort to be a better person, a better them, who have never heard the teachings, who don't have tools and spiritual friends to help them along the path. So we're so fortunate, we're so lucky. So I just wanted to introduce a few more tools, a few more tips on this last session of meditation. Then we're going to take a short break. We're going to come back, we're going to do some activities. And then we're going to do some meditation on metta, loving kindness. After that, we're going to do a group photo. Then we're going to have some lunch, do some cleaning, and then the retreat is over. But last-ditch attempt to offer some more tools before we meditate. And so this is the sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, number 20, on removing distracting thoughts. So some of you are like, oh my gosh, he's waited this long to tell us how to do this. So this is quite a famous sutta actually. And in it, the Buddha gives 5 different ways that we can subdue, overcome, or let go of distracting thoughts. Because this is the problem, man. Everyone has this problem. Like, they just keep on coming at me. And so the Buddha lists 5 different methods here. And the first one, we've already been practicing. This is the substitution method. So we've been using the breath, a wholesome, neutral object, to draw our mind back to. Instead of just giving it free rein in our mind, instead of just letting that monkey dance around, playing the bongos in our mind, every time we notice we've become distracted, we come back to the breath. We substitute that wandering mind for a very focused, directed mind. The Buddha used an analogy for this, which is a wooden peg. In the old days, they didn't use things like nails for building, and they would use like dowel, wooden pegs to join bits of wood. But sometimes that wood would start to rot. So how do you get it out? Well, you get another wooden peg and a mallet, and you push the old peg, the rotten peg, out with this new peg. In the same way, we use our new peg of the breath to hammer out those other tendencies, those rotten thoughts of ours that keep on buzzing away in our brain. We use the breath to come back over and over again to replace those thoughts in our mind. So this is the substitution method. This is what you've been doing over the last few days. So you've been working on removing those distracting thoughts using this substitution method, the breath. The second method the Buddha suggests is developing a sense of what's called hiri ottappa, which we can translate as conscientiousness and prudence. This is where we understand the drawbacks of these kinds of thoughts. So the image the Buddha uses is quite a full-on image, and again, Patricia, I don't know, there seems to be some weird synchronicity here, but it's imagining a skeleton, chain of bones around your neck. So it's a pretty full-on image, right? This is, I suppose, designed to bring up like a sense of shame, a sense of, what am I doing here? Imagine if your thoughts were like a necklace or a flashing sign in your head, right? Everyone could see. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Imagine how quickly we'd make progress. And so imagine this kind of embarrassment, or the kind of the prudence you would develop if people could see these thoughts of yours, or if you looked in the mirror really closely and you saw yourself in this way, you'd want to abandon them, right? And I don't want to bring up any feelings of shame for the thoughts you have. Like we have all sorts of thoughts. And I remember one of my friends, I remember saying to her, we were on a meditation retreat together, she was always so incredibly, perfectly sitting in the most straight and beautiful posture. She was always sitting in front of me. I was like, how does she do it? She's so still. And afterwards I said, oh my gosh, you were so still and you just must have been meditating so well. And she's like, oh my gosh, no, I was having sexual fantasies the whole time. And so like sexual fantasies, whatever, but maybe not during meditation, right? Because then we're just wasting that opportunity. certain thoughts will come up. Sometimes there'll be things like trauma, sadness, grief, unresolved stuff. Don't feel a sense of shame about these, especially when they've just kind of arisen. But once they've arisen, we don't need to stay with them during our meditation practice. Sure, examine them at another time in your life. One of the things we have lost, I think, as humans in this age is just getting bored, being alone with our thoughts and thinking through our stuff, pondering our life. We're so distracted, we've always got something to do. We don't have much time left these days just to be alone with ourselves and work through some of that stuff. And so then the problem is we bring that into our meditation practice. And if we're not careful, that will become our entire session, just sorting through our stuff, doing this mental cleaning. And this isn't meditation. And so do allocate some time in your life to do that stuff, to be with yourself, to sort through your mental stuff. Do. It's really important that you do. But in meditation, let's do meditation. And in the same way, like sometimes you'll be meditating and someone will be irritating you and you'll be like, oh, I'm going to punch him in the face. Like, that's a really full-on thought, right? Sometimes we have it, yeah? Or these kinds of thoughts actually do come into our mind. And if we're not careful, we just stick with them. And so then this kind of thought, maybe, that's where we can really get that sense of conscientiousness, of prudence, of thinking, not a good look. Not a good look in my mind. We want to let go of that. So this is a good method that we can use. But do be conscious that don't fall into this horrible shaming of yourself or I'm no good at this, I'm not worthy. If thoughts come up like that, deal with them outside of your meditation, but let them go during your meditation. And then those ones that we're kind of actively getting involved in, those like, wanting chocolate cake or hating that person or whatever, these are the ones we can let go with this method. So that sense of conscientiousness, prudence, hiriyottapa. The third method is just ignore it. Right? The Buddha is so practical. It's like, just as a person with good eyesight would close their eyes at the sight of seeing something ugly or that they don't like, so too we just close our eyes to these things, right? We don't look at it. Think about it, the more you look at it, the more you get agitated by it, the more you get involved in it, right? So if you kind of just like, okay, look, I'm not getting involved in that. You just don't look at it. This is very useful. I think sometimes the power of just ignoring something is we underestimate our ability just to not look at something, not get involved, not interact with things. And sometimes when you do this, it can very quickly disappear. Sometimes, if you're consciously trying to suppress something, it will just pop back up, right? So sometimes when you're kind of like pushing something down, it might not work. But the ignoring is just like, okay, not looking at it. And this is different to kind of deliberately pushing something down. So all of these methods, by the way, are in a sequence, right? We try the first one, substitution. We find a distracting thought coming into our mind, and we're like, come back to the breath, come back to the breath, come back to the breath. And we keep on doing that. But if that's not working, then we go to the second one of developing that conscientiousness, that prudence around that distracting thought. And then if that doesn't work, we're like, okay, I don't need to examine the drawbacks. That wasn't working. I'm just going to ignore it now. I'm not going to get involved. And then the fourth method is a bit more investigation, really inquiring more deeply not so much into the thought itself, but the processes that allow that thought to appear and take over the mind. And so the Buddha gives this analogy of a person walking very fast. This person's walking very fast. And then they're like, why am I walking fast? Why don't I slow down? And so they slow down. They walk more slowly. And then they're like, why am I walking slowly? Why didn't I just stand still? So they stand still. And then they think, why am I standing? Why don't I sit down? So they sit down. Then they think, why am I sitting? Why don't I just lie down? And so each of these postures is successively more relaxed, more comfortable, more at ease, more pleasurable. So if our mind is thinking very fast, always active, always busy, got these thoughts happening in it, we think, what are the drivers here? This is the sankharas, the will, the mental formation, sometimes they're called, the activities of the mind. Why are they bubbling away like this? Why don't I try to calm them down, to tranquilize them a little bit? So we're kind of like, we're not dealing with the specific thoughts here, but the mechanisms at play. And we realize that we can adopt a more refined and more relaxed posture of the mind, so to speak. It is possible, by thinking about this, to slow down the thinking pattern, to become more relaxed, more spacious in our mind, less activity, more tranquil in our mind. And so this is a slightly different way of practicing. But we've kind of been investigating a little bit of this. We've been thinking about how the mind becomes more tranquil, how we can develop more tranquility in our mind by doing certain things like relaxing the body, by taking time to get into our meditation practice, by leaving behind things of the past and future, by understanding how those hindrances arise and disappear. So that's the fourth. The fifth is the last resort. This is like pulling the emergency brake, or in case of emergency, break glass. This is the last resort. This is suppression. This is the image the Buddha uses of a strong person wrestling a weaker person, grabbing them, pulling them, pushing them, pinning them down. And he says, in the same way, you use your mind to overpower that thought. You grit your teeth, you press your tongue at the top of your mouth, and you really force your mind to submit to your will. So this is pretty extreme, right? Like, this is a lot of stuff. You'd want to be having a pretty bad, persistent thought, like thoughts of murder, or thoughts of harming someone, or maybe having an affair or something like that. Like, these are pretty solid reasons to, if it's really persistent in your mind, like, you're gonna have to deal with it, right? Sometimes you're gonna need a strong response, but this is going to be very rare that you're going to use this method. This is like number 5 on that list. We've got 4 other methods that we can use. And you can always, if you need to, stop meditating if your mind's becoming a little bit too persistent with this thought. So this isn't something you'd be doing all the time. And there are people who use a lot of will and a lot of force in their practice, a lot. You see them, like, as a teacher, I watch you sometimes, and I see people like this, and it's there's a lot of tension, a lot of effort that isn't very skillful, and you see people becoming quite fragile, brittle, and agitated and angry because they're using a lot of energy. They don't get a lot of peace, they don't get a lot of calm, and they don't get any bliss and joy from these kinds of activities because it's too harsh. So these are 5 methods that you can also use to overcome distracting thoughts. One more time. First one, substitution. The image, replacing a rotten wooden peg with a new wooden peg, just as we use the breath. Second one, conscientiousness and prudence. The image of the necklace, where we kind of understand the drawbacks of these kinds of thoughts, right? We see their downside. The third is to ignore, to turn a blind eye. The image is not looking at something. The fourth is the I can't remember. Oh, thank you. The sankharas, tranquilizing the sankharas. Slowing down, the person walking fast, then slow, then standing, then sitting, then lying down. Thank you. Doing a lot of remembering. And the fifth is that image of suppression, the wrestler, wrestling the mind. So these are 5 ways that we can overcome distracting thoughts. I'd suggest most of the time you just use the first one. It's the easiest, it's the most simple, and it leads to very beautiful results. The substitution method, using the breath, is something that will take us very, very far on the path. The breath fulfills the 4 satipatthanas, the 4 focuses of mindfulness. It's a very useful tool. And so this is something that I would recommend using for the bulk of your practice. 9 times out of 10, do breath meditation. At other times, you might do things like a death contemplation, practice some metta, practice some reflecting on the body, doing the anusatis, the recollections. These sorts of other practices are really good, really useful, but our main practice will probably be the breath. So that's what we're going to do now for the next 30 or so minutes. We're going to do our last session of breath meditation, and then we're going to have a quick break and we'll do some other things.